Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. Simon here. How's everyone doing today? So tonight, we're heading back to Thailand together. Have any of you been before? It's a beautiful country, lots of sun, incredible food, and warm, welcoming people. But at the same time, it's also a place where you'll never run out of scary stories. Tonight's story was shared by someone from Hong Kong who took a business trip to Thailand in the early 2000s to an area close to Pattaya. Let's call him Peter. As always, after the story, we'll break it down together from a Chinese cultural perspective and see if we can make sense of what might have happened. So turn on the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive right into Peter's experience. At the time, Peter worked for an international marketing company in Hong Kong. Because of his job, he was often sent overseas to places like Thailand or Singapore for trade shows and business events. When he first started this job, he actually enjoyed it. Traveling for work felt exciting. It was a chance to see new places and experience new cultures. But over time, like with any job, that excitement started to fade. Each trip became a chore, and it meant time away from his wife and kids. But he didn't really have much of a choice. It was his job, and he needed it to provide for his family. By this point, Peter had been to Thailand close to 50 times already, so it was nothing new to him anymore. He's already done all the touristy stuff, so most of the time, he just stayed in his hotel when he wasn't working. And even with all his previous trips, nothing strange has ever happened to him. He grew up in a Buddhist household where his parents were super religious, but personally, Peter didn't believe any of it, simply because he's never experienced anything that made him question his beliefs. But that all changed with this trip, because what happened during this visit would stay with him for the rest of his life. On this particular trip, Peter was only booked to stay for one night at a hotel. Now, this wasn't some rundown hotel in the middle of nowhere. No, it was actually a really beautiful modern hotel. He stayed there a few times in the past before, and he's never had any issues. The staff were always super polite and accommodating. The place itself, it was super modern, clean, and well-maintained. So it was just an all-around comfortable place to stay. Peter landed in Thailand early that morning. He went straight from the airport to attend the trade show that he flew in for. And by the time everything wrapped up, he made his way over to the hotel to check in. It was around 7 p.m. already. The receptionist handed him his key card, and without thinking too much of it, Peter headed toward the elevators and made his way upstairs to the 16th floor. He doesn't remember the exact room now, but one thing that he does remember was that this room was located at the very end of the hallway, right next to the fire escape stairwell. Peter tapped his key card at the door and stepped inside. At first glance, everything looked completely normal. The bathroom was immediately on the left as he entered, and further in was the bed and living area. The curtains were closed, and the bed was neatly made, and nothing really stood out to him. It was just a standard hotel room. He kicked off his shoes by the door and left his suitcase near the closet area. Out of habit, he walked straight into the bathroom to wash his hands before he unpacked. But the moment he stepped inside, something caught his attention. The sink was wet. It was like someone had just used it and gotten water all over the counter and the surrounding areas of the sink. Peter paused for a second, then leaned slightly to look toward the bathtub. That too was wet, as if someone had just taken a shower not too long ago. He frowned, because normally, when you check into a hotel room for the first time, everything is dry and unused. This wasn't something he's ever seen before. Being a neat freak and a germaphobe, this did bother him, but not enough to complain. He figured maybe house cleaning cleaned the room last minute and didn't bother drying everything properly. It felt careless, but at the same time, he tried not to think too much of it, so he brushed it off and went ahead to wash his hands. After that, he stepped back outside into the room and crouched down by his suitcase, unzipping it to grab his pajamas so that he could take a nice hot shower and relax for the night. But as he was halfway through opening his suitcase, something else made him stop. The curtains. they were wide open. He slowly looked up, staring at them for a moment, confused. He was certain that when he first walked into the room, they had been fully closed. But now, they were wide open, letting in the faint glow of the lights from outside. Peter stayed there for a few seconds, trying to recall if he had opened them without realizing it. But there's no way. He didn't even fully walk into the room yet. He convinced himself that he must have remembered wrong. Not wanting to overthink it, he stood up, walked over, and pulled the curtains shut. Then he grabbed his pajamas and proceeded to head into the bathroom, ready to take a hot shower and wash off the day's sweat. After his shower, Peter stepped back out, feeling refreshed, ready to go to bed and finally get some rest. But the moment he walked out from the bathroom again, the first thing he noticed were the curtains. They were wide open once again. Peter just stood there for a second, staring at them, confused. What the heck is going on? He thought. But since he didn't really believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, his mind immediately went to something more logical. Maybe they were automatic, or connected to some kind of motor system that was malfunctioning and causing them to open on their own. He walked over to take a closer look, checking along the sides and behind the fabric to see if there was any kind of mechanism. But there wasn't. It was just a normal manual curtain. Peter frowned, scratching his head. That was strange. Still, he didn't dwell on it for too much longer. He was tired as heck, and he just wanted to get to bed at this point. He simply pulled the curtains shut again and got into bed. He was exhausted from a full day of traveling and working at the trade show, and all he wanted to do now was to get a good night's sleep before heading back to Hong Kong the next morning. The second his head hit the pillow, he passed out, but it didn't last long. He doesn't know how much time had passed, but at some point, in the middle of the night, he was suddenly woken up by something strange. Something felt off, but it took him a second to realize what it was. It was the bed. It was shaking. At first, he thought it was an earthquake. He's experienced something similar before during a work trip to Japan, when a minor earthquake caused the bed to tremble in a very similar way, where it kind of felt like the bed was swaying and vibrating. So naturally, his first thought was that this might be another earthquake. Half asleep, he stayed laying there, waiting for it to pass. But even after about 10 seconds or so, it didn't stop. The shaking continued and even became more violent, almost like someone was physically shaking the bed or jumping on it from the side. Peter finally sat up, now fully awake. He quickly got out of bed and reached for the light switch for the lamp next to his head. The moment the light snapped on, the shaking suddenly stopped. Everything went completely still. Peter stood there in silence, his finger still resting on the light switch. At this point, he was more irritated than scared, because whatever that shaking was, it woke him up from his sleep. He looked around the room, trying to figure out what could have caused it, but nothing seemed out of place. Eventually, he let out a quiet sigh of defeat and climbed back into bed. Whatever it was, it stopped now, and he was too tired to think any further. So, he laid back down and drifted off again, this time not even bothering to turn the light off. That was when something truly terrifying happened. As Peter was laying there, drifting back to sleep, he was in that in-between state where you're half asleep and half awake. I'm sure some of you experienced this before, when your physical body is asleep, but your mind is still awake. He was aware of everything going on around him, but he couldn't move. His body felt completely paralyzed. Some people would call it sleep paralysis. It was in this state that he started to hear something. It was a bunch of voices coming from the bathroom. They were speaking Thai. Peter listened carefully. It sounded like a man speaking, his tone urgent, almost panicked. Now, Peter didn't speak Thai fluently, but somehow he understood what was being said, not through the words themselves, but through a kind of feeling, as if the meaning behind the words were being projected directly into his head. Peter got a sense that there was a family in the bathroom, a father and his 2 children. The man was telling them to wet their clothes in the shower. The fire was getting closer, and if they soaked themselves, they would be safer. Then, Peter heard the sound of the shower turning on and the water running. Along with it, the frantic movement of people rushing, splashing, trying desperately to cover themselves in water. Peter tried to move, to get up, to see what was happening, but he couldn't. His body wouldn't respond. He was completely stuck, lying there, fully aware but unable to do anything. A moment later, the bathroom door opened and the family came out. Peter could see them extremely clearly because the light in the room was still on. He didn't turn it back off when he returned to bed before. What he saw was horrifying. The father and his children looked as if they had been severely burned. Their skin on their faces and arms were covered in burns, and it all looked melted. Their clothes were charred and soaked through with water. They moved frantically and erratically across the room, as if trying to find a way out. They didn't even look at Peter. It was like he wasn't even there. They were too focused on escaping, as if the room was on fire. A fire that Peter couldn't see. Peter could hear them moving around, opening things, knocking into furniture. Then, he heard the curtains behind him being pulled open, as if they were trying to get out through the window. The entire time, they spoke rapidly to each other, their voices filled with fear. This went on for what felt like several minutes, and then, slowly, their voices began to fade. The movements stopped, until eventually, everything was silent again. It was only after all this commotion stopped that Peter began to regain control of his body again. The paralysis lifted, and he suddenly sat up in bed, breathing heavily, his heart racing. For a second, he just sat there trying to process what happened. Was he asleep the whole time? Was he just having a nightmare that was extremely vivid? He's never experienced a dream like this before. Then, he turned around to look at the windows behind him. The curtains were open, wide open. That's when he knew that he wasn't dreaming and that something was seriously wrong. Peter quickly put on his slippers, grabbed his keycard, and rushed out of the room. He went straight down to the lobby. It was around 2 a.m. now, and he was genuinely scared. He approached the front desk in a panic and told the receptionist that he needed to change the room immediately. He didn't get into detail and just said that something was very wrong with the room he had been given. What struck him as odd was the receptionist's reaction. She didn't seem surprised or shocked. She didn't even ask questions on why he wanted to change rooms all of a sudden at 2 a.m. She simply nodded calmly and told him that she could assign him another room on a different floor. She told him that he was actually the only guest staying on the 16th floor. There were plenty of vacancies that night, so it wouldn't be a problem. Peter didn't hesitate. He immediately asked for a room on a different floor. The receptionist nodded and said that would be fine. She told him that she would send a staff member upstairs with him to help gather his luggage, and then they could move him to his new floor. Peter went back up to his room with the bellboy, and having someone else with him made him feel a little bit more at ease. The two of them walked down the long, quiet corridor, toward the end of the hallway where Peter's room was located. The entire floor was silent, almost unnaturally so, which made sense considering that the receptionist told him that he was the only guest staying on that floor that night. As they approached the room, just a short distance away now, something ahead of them made both Peter and the bellboy slow down and then stop completely in their tracks. There was a man. He looked like he had just stepped out of Peter's room. At first, it didn't fully register, but as Peter focused on him, his entire body went numb. Even from the side, he immediately recognized the man's face. It was severely burned, and there was no doubt in his mind. It was the same man he had just seen while he was laying in bed, trapped in that half-asleep state. The figure moved slowly at first, almost casually, as if he was just another guest stepping out into the hallway. He didn't acknowledge Peter or the bellboy at all, and it felt as if they didn't even exist to him. Then, without warning, the man suddenly quickened his pace, turned the corner at the end of the hallway, and disappeared into the emergency stairwell right next to Peter's room. neither Peter nor the bellboy said anything. They just stood there, trying to process what they just saw, before slowly turning to look at each other, both silently confirming that they were both actually seeing the same thing. After a few seconds, they rushed toward the stairwell and looked inside, expecting to see the man somewhere on the steps. But there was nothing there. The space was completely empty. At this point, any sense of calm that Peter had left was completely gone. Without wasting more time, the two of them went straight into the room, quickly gathered Peter's belongings, and then made their way back down the hallway toward the elevators. Neither of them said a word to each other. Peter was eventually given a new room on a different floor, and for the rest of the night, nothing else unusual happened in this new room. But even then, he was far too shaken to relax. He left all of the lights on the whole night and laid awake in bed, his mind replaying everything over and over again. The next morning, he checked out as soon as the sun came up, not wanting to stay in that place for even a moment longer than he had to. It wasn't until he returned to Hong Kong that he finally decided to look into the history of this hotel, and what he found only made the entire experience even more disturbing. Years earlier, in 1997, there had been a massive fire in that very building. A gas cylinder had exploded in the hotel's restaurant, and the flames spread rapidly throughout the structure, burning for hours and trapping many of the guests inside. Some of them died from smoke inhalation, while others burned in their rooms, and in sheer desperation, some even jumped from the upper floors in an attempt to escape. A lot of people died there that day. The hotel had to go through major renovations and a rebranding before reopening again to resume business. After learning about this, Peter made it very clear to his company that no matter what, he never wanted to be sent back to this hotel again whenever he had to travel to Thailand. Because whatever he experienced that night, and whoever that man was, it was something he never wanted to experience again. So, what do you all think about this one? It's a pretty heavy one, right? What do you think happened here to Peter? Was he too exhausted and just dreaming? Or was there something else at play here? Now, Peter didn't want to disclose the hotel's name since they're still in operation, but a quick search online will give you an idea of where he stayed. Alright, so what do I think happened here from a Chinese cultural perspective? There's quite a lot to talk about in this one, so let's break it down bit by bit together. So what type of haunting is this? So this is a pretty loaded question because it doesn't seem to be that simple. I feel like there are different things going on here at the same time, making the answer a bit more layered. So what I think Peter experienced inside this room is something totally different than what he experienced outside the room, which could make things a bit more confusing. To better understand this, we first have to understand the difference between a residual haunting and a restless spirit. A residual haunting, called 陰氣殘留 or 靈異重演 in Cantonese. This is like a recording of something that's happened in the past, involving intense human emotions combined with violent deaths. This can leave behind an imprint into the environment. But this imprint is not a soul. It's not conscious or aware. It's more like the space itself remembers what happened. In my culture, everything, from walls to objects to space, can carry and store energy. And normally, energy flows and dissipates, but in extreme situations where really intense human emotions like fear, pain, panic, and sudden death are involved, this can create something called shock imprint. This is where 靈異重演, spiritual replay, comes in. This energy imprint is not stable, and it starts to cycle. So instead of happening once and dissipating, it becomes a loop tied to the location. So I personally believe that what Peter experienced inside his room was a partial residual haunting. I think that the scene that Peter saw play out actually did happen in the past. The fire was happening in the hotel, and this Thai father and his two children were desperately trying to wet themselves in the bathroom before trying to find a way out, but I do not think that they ever made it out of this room alive. I believe that they were one of the many victims who perished inside these rooms. The residual haunting was the constant looping of the event that happened, but I don't believe that this father is a residual haunting. He is the only wandering spirit, Yun-won. His 2 children were not actually there anymore. They most likely have already moved on to the next phase of existence. The father is interacting with an imprint loop of the fire and their final moments in life together. He's most likely conscious, or at least semi-conscious, but he is trapped in the trauma of the event, where his mind is still reacting to the fire, the danger, and the need to protect his children in the situation. I think that he's an active spirit interacting with the residual energy. This is why the bathroom was actually wet when Peter came into the room for the first time. If this was purely a residual loop, the environment shouldn't change. The father spirit, in this case, is most likely still reacting and actually turning on the water faucets and opening the curtains, changing the physical environment. He's still perceiving the loop as his children really being there, but I don't believe that his children are conscious entities. Residual hauntings often retain sensory details like sound and movements. A conscious spirit interacting with replays amplifies this realism as his true feeling of panic blends in with the replay. The strongest indicator for me that the father is not part of the residual replay is when Peter and the bellboy both saw him outside the room. Residual hauntings are fixed in place. Think of it as an Instagram reel or something similar, where it just replays a point in time over and over again. This loop is restricted to exactly where it happened. I think that if the father was purely residual, he would only appear inside the room and shouldn't be able to walk out of the room and move down the stairs, because residual replays can't leave its original imprint. They can't adapt to new circumstances. The father also chose a direction and quickened this pace before vanishing. A loop would just play the same thing in a fixed pattern. But what the father did suggests conscious movement. Also, if you notice, 2 children were not present outside the room. Some may suggest that the father's path and actions outside the room could have been part of the original loop. Perhaps they tried to escape through the stairs and died there. It's possible, but I don't believe this is the case. Because the father was alone outside the room, I don't believe he would have left his children behind during the fire. He was also able to interact with this physical environment, like turning on faucets and opening curtains, which is a big indicator that he was an active spirit. So that was probably a bit confusing, but to keep it simple, let me compress all of that into a short sentence. The father, stepping out into the corridor and interacting with this environment, is the smoking gun that signals to me that he's not a residual recording. He's a trapped, conscious spirit reacting to the trauma of his death and still trying to protect his children, and not merely a ghost playback of the past. His children, on the other hand, are residual recordings. He is aware he exists, but he doesn't fully understand the passage of time. To him, the hotel is still the site of the fire, and he's still trying to save his kids. I actually don't even think he knows that his children have already moved on, because his emotional memory of them and the situation is inseparable from the loop. He reacts to this loop as if it's still happening every time it replays. And this is why he's stuck here. Psychologically and emotionally, he can't move on from this incident. Even if he has some sense that something is off, his trauma and fixation prevent him from fully realizing that his children are actually gone. We have a term for this: Yun-won, spirit trapped by trauma or injustice. Zapnim, fixation that anchors him to the scene. And Yamhae-samlo, or灵异重演, residual energy replaying the children's final actions. Thank you, Hong Kong horror family, for making it to the end of this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed the story and the breakdown. Until we speak again next week, stay safe and good night.